You had to know that was coming. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Paley Center for Media in Beverly Hills. I'm Michelle Mayhew, the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer at TIFF, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight in front of a live audience of film lovers and industry professionals to present the inaugural edition of Times Talks TIFF. Tonight's launch marks TIFF's new and exciting collaboration with the New York Times, a great strategic partner, setting in motion an international series of high-profile talks and panel discussions between celebrated film talent and esteemed New York Times film journalists about the top films and performers of the year. This year is a milestone for our organization. 2015 marks the Toronto International Film Festival's 40th anniversary. That's a big one. And this new collaboration with the Times is a great alignment with our dedicated efforts to extend our reach and impact around the world. Times Talks TIFF events will entertain audiences in New York, Toronto, London, and Los Angeles, like tonight, effectively mobilizing our global strategy of placing more of TIFF's programming in key centers around the world. We couldn't think of a better way to kick off the series than with a very special and intimate interview featuring Academy Award nominees Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley, the stars of Morton Tilden's The Imitation Game. It's no surprise that the incredible film that they are here for tonight is up for 8 Oscars this year, and we saw it all start to experience firsthand the overwhelming buzz around the film last September during its Canadian premiere at the 2014 Toronto Film Festival. Not only did it capture the hearts of Toronto audiences, they're very savvy, and they gave the film the Grolsch People's Choice Award, the highest honor for the most popular film at our festival. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage Carol Olsen-Day, the New York Times Director of Programming for Times Talks. Please welcome Carol.
Thank you, Michelle. Times Talks is delighted and honored to partner with TIFF to celebrate the best films and performances of the year here in Los Angeles and around the world on the web. As Michelle mentioned, tonight's inaugural Times Talks TIFF, we are thrilled to present 2 of the most accomplished actors in movies today, now appearing in one of the year's most highly acclaimed films. The nominees for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actress for their performances in The Imitation Game, which tells the story of the father of modern computing and unsung war hero Alan Turing. The Imitation Game, which is an exquisite cinematic performance with extraordinary performances by tonight's guest, is also nominated for Academy Awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Film Editing, and Best Production Design. You'll hear much more about the film and our guests in just a moment from our moderator. A culture reporter for the New York Times, she is this year's carpetbagger, your nytimes.com guide to the movie season, the awards. It's happening right now. The Carpetbagger is a must-read for Hollywood insiders, insider wannabes, and film lovers of every kind. So please join me in welcoming New York Times reporter Cara Buckley and our very special guests, Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley.
Everyone, thanks so much for coming tonight, and thank you too for coming. I don't know how much choice you have in the matter, but thank you for agreeing to do Harvey's bidding. So, you know, I was just thinking, you two have been talking about this film premiered in September, and that's a long time to talk about these 2 roles. And do you ever feel like you're going into sort of a rote? Never, right? You never?
No, I never feel like
no.
No,
amazing.
It's always fresh. That's the first time I've been asked that question.
Yeah,
So that
and we both sort of died and didn't know what to say. We just looked really frightened at me.
I thought I'd let you speak first.
Oh, thanks. That's kind of you.
But it's rare that you have a film or a role that you can talk about to this extent that actually fulfills part of the purpose of why we did the film in the first place, which is to get the story to as broad an audience as possible. And so, while some of the timing's a bit odd, not least tonight, but some of it is repetitive in its nature. But weirdly, you don't regret it. You don't feel that you're churning out something that, if it's felt, it doesn't matter what you say, however many times you say it. If it really matters, then it comes across. And that's certainly the case with Alan Turing's story and our involvement in it. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be nice to talk less about it after the weekend. But what I also, don't you find as well, when you actually see a clip of the film, you go, oh, that was it. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're talking about it. It's just work we did on a day. And that's very odd, because you suddenly realise there is this aching gap between the end of the days of production, and let alone then seeing it, let alone then talking about it again and again in this context.
And when did you wrap up production on it?
Last November?
Yeah, December the 1st or 2nd, I think. Yeah,
yeah.
Of
I think
2000,
for me it was November.
Yeah,
Right. So
a long time ago. That's me. Yeah.
With Alan Turing, did you grow up knowing much about him, let alone the extent to what he went through?
Not really. I mean, I was aware of him through Hugh Whitmore's play, Breaking the Code, which Derek Jacobi starred in, I mean, sublimely, and he was, I saw the televised version of that play a while ago. I mean, that must have been 90s or early 90s, late 80s.
I didn't know
but
anything about it until we started.
Yeah.
No.
So you went, oh, I've been cast in something. No, you read the article in The Guardian about his
I read the
part,
article in
didn't
The
you?
Guardian, which would have been in about 2009, which is the first time that I'd heard of him.
Well, tell me what was in this article in The Guardian.
It was basically his story, and that it was one of the pushes to try and get him pardoned before he finally was. And it was sort of saying his part in the Second World War, of the breaking of the Enigma Code, and what happened to him and what the British government did to him. And I remember reading it and being completely shocked and angry that I didn't know who he was, what he'd done, and what had been done to him. And particularly as somebody who is a bit of a history buff, and particularly with that period, I really enjoy reading about that period, how I'd missed it completely. And I think it's the same, it's the same reaction that people have when they come to the film and when they do find out about him for the first time. You can't help but be angry that, to a large extent, his name was lost, not to mathematicians and scientists, but to people outside that arena. So yes.
Or to the LGBT community, or to people in artificial intelligence, or to people who worked in any kind of secret form during the war. I mean, but like the specialist groups, for want of a better term, but he's not as widely known as all of his achievements, or at least standing as an iconic figure in all of those worlds, really deserves. And that was one of the main reasons that I wanted to do this. The script pulled me in because it was witty, it was utterly uncompromising in its introduction to this complex man, and while he was single-minded and pompous and arrogant, there was something alluringly gauche about him. There was something innocent and trapped in this world that wasn't quite to his understanding, that was utterly compelling in Graham's script and very funny. And then you start to discover him, then you discover how the code unravels, and then finally you're just sucker punched by this devastating outcome to his life. And it then just leaves you, like Keira said, just angered about why this isn't known more. Why is he not on the front cover of textbooks? Why is he not on the back of banknotes in England? Why is he not in, why aren't there statues to him in Parliament Square? He's an incredibly important cultural, social, political and scientific hero and figure. So became a real crusade for all of us, actually. It was a very key motivating factor in getting the film done.
And for you, you're still, almost years later, impassioned about talking about him. It must have been very painful to play somebody who was at once so brilliant and then kind of destroyed in a way.
It was. I mean, he suffered. He had a very sort of raw nerve to the world and his reality from the very beginning. He was a very sensitive child. He had a stammer. I mean, a really bad stammer from the age of 4 onwards. Well, that was when his parents first really noticed it. They were away a lot in the diplomatic, which required, years at a stretch, sometimes abroad in India. I think in the case when his mother came back and discovered Alan had grown this stammer. And he was in foster care, and you know, it just really struck me very early on how sensitive he was, how touch paper sensitive he was to the world and the environment around him. He wasn't an isolated genius. He wasn't someone who operated without any kind of context of what it was to be a part of the world or the people in that world. He was incredibly sensitive to it. But he put walls up. He put walls up with his stammer, which I can only imagine even now how difficult that is for a child to make the normal social bonds with its peers. To suffer a stammer badly it's really, really hard. And then let alone in a sort of near Victorian age of schooling and intolerance that era was about. And then beyond that, to have his burgeoning sexuality kind of blossom in his you know, the tender adolescent years, and for that to be an utterly forbidden thing. And even within the groups that he was an expert in and almost a hero in, within the scientific community early on, with writing on computable numbers, this epic, groundbreaking piece of work which established the blueprint of what computers really are and still are, and what computer programming still is and was then, is, you know, he lived in a community which he should have been raised on the shoulders of, and he shied away from that. He was in a college at Cambridge that was tolerant, that had Keynes and other very flamboyant homosexual men who, he felt an outsider to that, so he never quite fitted in. And then to have that horrific, I mean, he was basically given the choice between 2 years imprisonment or 2 years chemical castration through weekly estrogen injections. And he chose the latter in order to carry on his work, his groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence at that stage, as well as computing. Well, tied in with computing, but theorizing as well as making computers. And, you know, we did that scene where Joan visits him in the flat in Manchester very late in the schedule, and by then I got to feel that I knew something of this extraordinary man, and there were just 2 or 3 takes at the beginning where I was not really in control of my emotions at all. I couldn't stop crying after the take. It really took me time, and it wasn't because I was completely involved in the character. I realized I was actually just grieving him. I just really understood what this man I'd grown close to must have gone through, the reality of it, and it really, really upset me, and then had to sort of pull back from that a little bit to actually service the scene rather than what I was actually doing as Benedict grieving this beautiful man, Alan Turing.
If we could now, actually, there's a clip I'd like us to run, the Imitation Game clip. If we could roll that, please. I think it happens at the beginning of the film.
This big paper you wrote, what's it called?
The Imitation Game.
Right, that's what it's about.
Would you like to play?
Play?
It's a game. A test of sorts. For determining whether something is a machine or a human being.
How do I play?
Well, there's a judge and a subject, and the judge asks questions, and depending on the subject's answers, determines who he is talking with, what he is talking with, and all you have to do is ask me a question.
Someone was trying to ask Siri a question whilst Siri is not available at this moment during the Times talk, Tiff.
In this scene, it's like he's starting to realize there might not be a way out here. And I understand, I was watching some clips of people recalling the real Alan Turing. Not that you weren't the real, but you know, obviously. Sorry.
Hi, I'm an actor. My name's Benedict.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I've completely lost my train of thought. That he had an innocence about him, they said. Like, he was guileless and saying, yes, you know, because this all started with him being burglared right in his home, and he ended up saying, yes, I had a lover over, and he was just so open and
his
guileless.
heroism was very quiet, and he just calmly admitted his nature. He didn't martyr himself purposefully. He just wanted to be true to who he was in stating that he was a homosexual man, and he knew what the consequences were. But he, you know, it was forced upon him by an era of utter, sort of truly appalling and hard to imagine now intolerance, and I think partly spawned out of the fear of the Red Threat and the time with communism that that certain groups of men from certain backgrounds had the Cambridge fire, you know, the Cambridge spies, and I think there was a lot of fever around that. It was our form of McCarthyism, really, you know, really, really terrible stain on our history, really shaming moment of our time, of our culture, even. But yeah, no, he was incredibly gauche, and it was one of the most endearing qualities that I found, anyway, just researching him and talking to people about him, and also that was reflected in some of the only people I got to speak to who were alive at the time of knowing him. Alive at the time, alive whilst he was alive. Who are still alive is what I'm trying to say, with jet lag brain bleeding out my ear. And they were really two groups. One was his nieces, and they said they remembered him just being delightful company. That they didn't feel that they were these Victorian things to be seen and not heard. That they were equals to him. They were entertained by him. They were amused by him. They were utterly engrossed and captivated and just inspired by him. He would do. I mean, he'd just tell them funny stories. He'd just pay attention to them. He'd listen. People talked about how, for a man who, when he was very focused and very in his own way, couldn't look and couldn't make eye contact and held himself in a certain way, and the stammer, obviously. But other people also said that when he was confident, he made you feel 20 feet tall. You had a beam-like focus of energy from him, and he was completely focused and generous and supportive. And they told me stories about him playing chess with his back to the board and things like that. And as well as just being a marvelous figure in their family.
The role to
yeah,
yourself?
I got to play chess with my back. That's how I usually play. I don't know how to play, so I just turn my back and pretend. No, I did try and play a bit of chess, and we tried to do a crossword or two, which was pretty hopeless.
Both of you?
It was actually all five of us, and it was just the Guardian quick crossword, and it took us 5 days, and we still didn't.
You literally need a thesaurus to finish that dictionary, that crossword in about 5 seconds flat, but yeah. But though, yeah, that was one of the most beautiful aspects of him, really, was how kind of in tune with something very natural and untainted he was. And that harmonized with how he responded to what was in his environment with his work as well. You know, it was literally a bit of wording, like I think it was the word mechanic, a mechanical process that spawned the idea of literally trying to create a physical object that would perform the machinations of a computer. Computers in those days were rooms full of female clerks who would perform calculus on a very arduous, continual basis. And he imagined from just the wording of that question into this paper, this amazing paper in his, I think, early, if he's literally 20 years old, if not younger, I can't remember, I'm sorry, on computable numbers that he wrote at Cambridge as an undergrad. And he just took this one word into a massive lateral explosion of imagination to create what we now know as the modern day computer. And that sparked on every single point in his life. And even in the latter years when he was suffering the change in his body and his mental faculty was being corrupted by these estrogen injections, which were then actually releasing a release device that was tied into his metabolism. These doses were just ruining him. He studied morphogenesis, which is the mutation of cells based on their environmental stimuli. So even that he managed to pull into something bigger than himself. All the time his work was about exploring things that affected him but were then made bigger than himself.
You know, one of the things when I was preparing for this and looking at old crypto analysts, I think, is that the word?
Cryptographers, cryptanalysts.
Or something like that, that was sort of haunting was someone who I think knew Alan back then said, you know, he was glad that the security guards at Bletchley Park didn't know that Alan was gay because the war could have had a different outcome. And I thought, wow, you know, because of like what you spoke about before, the intolerance.
That's shocking, and it's utterly true to see how we treated one of a man that basically saved the democracy from starvation, from Nazi overrule, from the tyranny of Hitler's regime, was then punished in turn for being gay, and by that very democracy, by that liberty that he'd helped buy with his work, with many other men and women's work. It has to be mentioned at Bletchley. I mean, real heroes of a very stoic nature, including Joan Clarke, which you should ask Keira about, because she deserves her own film in her own right. and then I can stop talking. But you know, just an incredible group of Polish code breakers as well before that, whose machine he then adapted to break the Enigma machine, the Enigma code. I mean, well, from the Enigma machine. But you know, Keira?
No, I have nothing to add.
So you two have been friends for a while. You met on Atonement.
Yeah.
You bonded in those fantastic bathing suits that you met. I don't know if you remember the scene. They were very similar.
He was wearing pretty much the same one that I was wearing. Had a different effect.
It's one of my favourite photographs. Is the three. It's Patrick Kennedy, you in the middle, and me.
We
and
look
she looks like this
sperm.
Buzz Barkley. What?
Sorry,
Sperms.
we kind of do look like sperms, though. Sorry.
Speak for yourself, love.
Sorry.
I look like a Victorian strongman who
Yes,
just
of course.
some sort of tent on a Brighton beach, ready to, you know, do some calisthenic exercises and jump in the car. No, you look. She looks incredible. She looks like a Buzz Barkley, just, you know, one of those incredible swimmers, and dived the most elegant dive I think I've ever seen on film or in life.
Thanks, and it was my first dive off a diving board. I've never done one since because it was so good. I was like, no, I don't need to repeat that.
That's why Tom Daly's now at diving.
Yeah,
Saw
exactly.
you do that.
Oh, yeah.
Right, I could do that.
Yeah.
Here, I'm going to do it. Amazing. And then, you know, Patrick Kennedy and I left to embarrassment in these onesies that were sort of cut quite close.
Because I remember that day so well, because we weren't actually meant to shoot it that day, but suddenly it was like the most beautiful scene. And him and Patrick Kennedy had been out for like a major night the night before.
Yeah.
So we're more hungover than I've actually ever seen you in your entire life.
Yeah.
It was kind of spectacular.
It was early days, not so professional then.
So it must have been great fun to sort of meet up again. I mean, you hadn't worked together since.
Well, such a privilege to work with, you know, one of our greatest film stars of our generation, and somebody who's just achieved so much more than I had. No, seriously, you know. And what face were you pulling then?
It was sort of like a thanks face, really.
Oh, good. Okay. No, it really was. It was brilliant. It's wonderful to sort of, you know, share a fuller, more meaningful relationship with Keira on screen. It was brilliant.
And so you had heard about Alan in this 2009 Guardian article, and then probably, was it during filming again that it, you know, the Queen's pardon, that issue came up?
Yeah, was it right at the end? I think it was right at the end when we just,
yeah,
it did.
And had you known at all about Joan Clark?
No.
Nothing.
I mean, I'd read in that article, they'd mentioned Joan Clark, or the fact that he had been engaged to a woman while he was at Bletchley. And the actress brain in me thought, oh, that's an interesting story. But no, I didn't know anything about her. And so it was research when I said yes to the project. And I wish I could speak as intelligently as he can about it. But
You
I
can.
don't think I can. No, I mean, you know, every single one of the people all of these characters are absolutely extraordinary, and as he said, you know, do deserve their own stories in their own right.
John Ken Crossley, Alexander, all of them, every single one of them.
And it was wonderful to be able to research her.
And what drew you to agreeing to do it, or, you know, going for it?
I think it really was what drew everybody to the project, which was just that sense that there had been a great injustice, and if you could possibly get the Alan Turing story out there to a wider public, then we all wanted to be a part of trying to do that, you know. And I think that's why when you look at this cast, it's an extraordinary cast of actors who are coming in for very small little bits because they wanted to all be a part of that. So it was really that. And then, you know, completely lucky for me that it was also an incredibly interesting character and somebody who was so inspiring and a sort of a pioneer in her own right.
And I was thinking, you know, everyone around him kind of was, obviously, her especially, because she was just forging ahead. She was this brilliant mathematician who was recommended to the Post.
Yeah, her actual story is slightly different than the one in the film. It's that really annoying thing when you go, no, this isn't a documentary, and I have to remember this isn't a documentary. So I kept going in there to Graham, the writer, going, no, but this isn't quite right. And he's like, no, I know, but that would take 10 more pages to explain that, and we've got to tell the story. Yeah, okay. But yeah, she was actually recommended to the Post by her Oxford professor. So she'd got a double first from Oxford, and he said, right, you need her at Bletchley, and it still took her 2 years. She went in initially as a secretary, and it took her 2 years. Even though she'd been brought in, they wouldn't accept that she should be in the room, and it took her 2 years to get in there. And then once she was in the room that she, you know, should have been in, she was paid a fraction of what the men were paid. So eventually all of the guys kind of went, okay, well, we'll try and get you more money. So they said that she was a linguist, even though she couldn't speak any other language apart from English, so that they could get her a tiny bit of a pay rise.
It's just not good enough.
Not good enough. No.
Right. Well, let's see, then we'll talk about the crossword again. There's a clip called Crossword Win, and if we could roll that one, please. So.
You finished?
Yes.
Five minutes and 34 seconds.
You said to do it in under 6.
Congratulations. My warmest welcome to His Majesty's service. If you speak a word of what I'm about to show you, you will be executed for high treason. You will lie to your friends, your family, and everyone you meet about what it is you really do.
And what is it that we're really doing?
We're going to break an unbreakable Nazi code and win the war.
Oh.
One of the things I love about that scene is you two, your characters, form this bond right there in that moment. There's like a flash of recognition in your eyes, seeing, an intellectual equal. And that really carries through their lives. And she was so non-judgmental of him. The real Joan and you, Joan,
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at this clip of her, and she was saying, it was just amazing. When Alan proposed to her, she said yes, and then he said, I'm gay. And then, this wonderful English lady says, naturally, that worried me a bit.
Yeah.
It was just,
Yeah.
And then she said, because I do believe that is permanent, And I just thought, it's very English stiff upper lip in a way, but obviously it was just almost, it didn't matter as much as how much love she had for him.
No, but, I think a lot of people have made that decision, I don't think it's that rare, and it wasn't something that I found difficult to get my head around, I think, and particularly when you look at that time period, what she was offered was, okay, you could have this romantic love, but pretty much be chained to a kitchen sink and raise some kids, but not be allowed to kind of work and do what you were completely passionate about, or have this complete meeting of minds where, okay, the romance might not be there, but you could do what it was that you were completely inspired by, and I get that friendship, and that it was a meeting of minds. It was two people that understood each other and were fascinated by the same thing. And yeah, of course you'd think, okay, maybe we can make this work. And particularly that love that comes between best friends, and I think they were, particularly for that time. I think they were best friends. So it sort of made complete sense.
And also, her being paid, so much less. There's all of these things.
There's an outsider issue as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
They're both people who are sort of slightly on the fringes and not being treated with the respect that their talent deserves. And he spies that straight away, the sexism, and he knows what that's about. He understands prejudice. He can see that language of bullying and stereotyping, and he's not going to fawn to it. He can see credit, or at least allow credit to be displayed, which he, brilliantly does immediately.
And, by the time both, obviously, Alan and also Joan had died by the time, so how did you glean information about their friendship and their, what their relationship was like?
Well, Andrew Hodges' biography is wonderful, and that's the source material for Graham's script in general, but also a wonderful resource for us actors trying to blueprint our characters. But I as far as the relationship goes, very little. There's this wonderful interview which you should talk about. Which
I think it's the same one that you're quoting.
From,
so I watched that interview, and the characterization was sort of taken from that and from what I read in Andrew Hodges' book and various things that I Googled, But yeah, that interview I found very helpful because there's that, I think when you think about people who are trying to break that glass ceiling, you think about people really powering through it and screaming and shouting, and you don't think about somebody who's so nice, and you don't think about somebody who's so quiet. And I thought that's a really interesting way to deal with prejudice and way to deal with trying to get in that room is to, and it, there's a scene where she says you have to make them like you, and I loved that idea that that's what she'd realised. And that's an incredible thing to realise and to be able to do, and not allow your anger to push through that, but to be able to kind of control that, I thought was a really interesting sort of character trait.
One of the things I was interested to, this is back in the 40s, did you have to, your accents, obviously, did you have to sort of go back in time in terms of how you were speaking and what class they were in? And
Yeah.
You always do. I mean, it's part of what you're trying to honour with getting the legacy of the story right. You don't want to ostracize a modern ear, but at the same time you have to work on it.
The English accent's changed a lot.
A lot, an awful lot.
And it's I love that era for the accents, and it's a lovely thing to kind of play around with.
We weren't that far off it with Atonement. I mean, that was Pal and Pressburger footage we were watching. And
we should go into that right now. Can you go back into how does it sound different? Like
it's terribly, it's tipped. So, if you're going to do it, then everything becomes a little bit more clipped than modern English. So when I'm talking, it's kind of,
yes. Consonants hit a little
and also, you're very nasal. You're in the nose. So unlike American, which you've got a very open throat. So.
You're drowning.
That was my drowning American accent, obviously.
But yeah, no, I mean, for Alan's. I mean, there's no recorded footage or audio recording of his voice, and it's a very specific voice. There's a lot of anecdote about it, a lot of written anecdote, and like I said in Andrew's book and many others, but nothing to literally base it on. So the period was as important as the accuracy with that, and obviously, if I played the stammer with as much deliberation, as much intrusion as it had on his life, then we would still be watching the film now. I mean, it would have. So, I with all respect, I had to incorporate it into almost the thing of it being caught on the breath rather than hitting plosives or those sort of cliches of a stammer. Try and find something where it's almost before the word, that there's a gasping for it, that there's the cliff has already been jumped off before the word's said. And obviously to pan it out in a sort of psychological mapping of the character through the piece is something that flagpoles, the kind of flagpole. Do I mean that? Yes, I think I do.
Go with it.
Yeah, I'll go with it. We're mountaineering, we're flagpoling characters. It's all going fine. No, but just pinpointing. I think is what I was trying to say. Pinpointing moments.
And you went from
pinpointing moments which were, very specific to him as far as difficulty. That would obviously ramp up the amount of stammering that may have occurred. So it told the psychological story as well as being true to the descriptions of him. But the period always helps. I mean, and the stuff we did on Atonement is not that far away from this as well. So it was a world we're both familiar with. And we had wonderful Sarah Shepherd, who's both the dialect coach and also helped me achieve Anna's particular stammer.
And you're obviously very good too at doing different voices, like your Alan Rickman, your Shere Khan, and your Chewbacca. Could you do that?
This is the Times Talks tip.
But we like some levity every now and then. We do.
Actor,
I know.
Paid monkey.
No, you're not.
I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to lower the tone of Times Talks Tiff. I have to look at it every time I say it. That's a good tongue twist. That's very good.
Really hard.
You want to get in the period to say Times Talks Tiff.
Yeah.
Tip of the tongue. All that. Very helpful. Times Talks Tiff. Okay. Have I got off it now by doing this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Right.
No, I might come back to it, but because you're so good at it.
It's there. Okay. It's already it's done. But thank you. I could take a compliment without then performing it.
Okay. Well, let's then go into the Like You clip, which Keira has spoken about, but it's a very nice moment if we could play it between their characters.
You got him to like you.
Yes.
Why?
Because I'm a woman in a man's job and I don't have the luxury of being an arse. Ellen, it doesn't matter how smart you are. Enigma is always smarter. If you really want to solve your puzzle, then you're going to need all the help you can get. And they are not going to help you if they do not like you.
Wise woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, was this something that Joan, you think she knew? I mean, it was just part of her. She realized that to get ahead in this man's world, she did have to.
I have no idea, is the answer. But from that interview that you saw as well, I thought it was very clear that she had a particular thing about her. And I thought that made a huge amount of sense to where she got and the fields that she worked in, and being able to work with, I should imagine, some pretty misogynistic men, and sort of fly above that. And I thought about my own thing, and I thought, I'm awful at that. And, you know, I never get my way. And it's probably because I go in and I go, this is so unfair.
Do you?
Actually, yeah, completely. And if you actually, maybe I was trying to learn it for myself, and I was trying to think, you know, if you go in and try and be nice, then maybe that's better. I haven't managed it yet.
It's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean,
it's really hard.
Because women are expected to be nice. And so you're just thinking,
no, you're thinking, I don't want to. Yeah. I've never managed. I'll keep going.
So I would like to sort of go and back to, you both come from acting families, right? Like you both grew up in these acting families, and I guess knew quite young that this is what you want to do. This anecdote about you asking for an agent at 3, it keeps on getting, I realize, rolled out at every interview.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I don't. Is it the first time you've heard? Well,
God,
guess what? Well, apparently, when I was 3, I obviously don't remember it, but apparently when I was 3, I asked for an agent. I think it's because my mum's a writer, she was an actress, and my dad's an actor, and they always had agents phoning up the house, and I used to pick up the phone. And probably I didn't know what an agent was. I was just like, well, if you've got one, then I want one, but I don't know.
And I mean, and for you as well, is it just something that seemed like you always knew? It was...
Well, for a large part, I tried to steer clear of it in a certain way. I mean, my parents, they gave me an education where I could have been a doctor, a lawyer, physicist. I mean, just anything other than an actor.
Because they both were.
They both are. Yeah,
they both
still
are.
Yeah, still working actors. They played my parents in Charlotte recently.
Yeah.
So. And yeah, they and
How
other
did
things.
they do in those roles?
How did they do as my mum and dad? Pretty damn good.
It's good.
They've had some practice.
Yes.
Definitely had some practice. So yeah, no, that was an amazing experience, a really wonderful experience. And the only other time I've actually sort of acted with them was in Atonement. I told them that I was getting married in a scene, and I said, and they were around, and I hadn't seen them for a bit, and I said, do you want to come along and watch it? And, oh yes, and they came along and went, well, maybe we could pretend to be your parents. So it was actually the first time they ever were my parents. They were just the back of their heads, but they had a lovely day, and it was.
Were they good in
well, we
that?
thought that might be it. You know, it might be the only time that we have a moment on film together. Little do we know that Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss had other plans, but. No, the point is, yeah, no, I grew up with parents and like Keira, that sort of environment of agents and a house full of actors or artists or writers, and it was a wonderfully intoxicating kind of thing to be surrounded by. But at the same time, points where I rebelled against it, wanted to be anything but mainly them really imploring me not to take the same path because it's so peripatetic, it's so uncontrollable, both your social life, you never know when the next gig's going to be or where it's going to be, your family life gets intruded upon. There's so many sort of weirdnesses and oddities to it. There's no stability, and they wanted that for me. They wanted what they felt they didn't have for me as parents. They wanted me to experience an adult life that was more adult. And I threw it all back in their face to carry on being an actor, but they seem to be quite happy with where it's got me to.
And you stuck with your name. I mean, didn't they change?
No.
No.
No, to start off with, I was Benedict Carlton, which is my middle name, which is my grandfather, my father's name, first name Carlton. And he was advised to drop Cumberbatch because it was just such a muddle of a name, which it is. It's a ridiculous name, but like I've often said, it sounds like a fart in a bath, It's,
right.
Which is even funnier in an English accent. Fart in a bath.
See, we're throwing the Times talk out the window, so we're just gonna straight in.
That's as near as I straight
right.
towards bad taste. And then an agent who's wiser than me or anyone else said, no, that's a good name. And once people have got a hang of it or had fun with it, which are and continuing to do, it'll sort of stick. So yeah.
And for you too, Keira, growing up, your parents were on the stage, right? And they were lefties, and must have been an equally vibrant household.
Yeah.
Did they implore you not to go into
Yes.
this?
No, I mean, and I started acting when I was 6. It was actually because and they were desperate for that not to happen. But
Did you get an agent at 6?
I did get an agent at 6.
Did you really? At 6?
I was dyslexic. I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And a very brilliant teacher said to my parents, is there anything that you can hold like a carrot in front of her to dangle so that you can make her read? And they said, well, she wants an agent. And he said, get her one. Because, you know, then you can say, if you don't learn to read and if you drop a grade and if you don't do well at school, then you're not allowed to go up for acting parts. And that's literally what they did. So it was always, I was only allowed to go up for roles if I got better or if my grade stayed the same. But if they ever dropped, then I wasn't allowed to do it.
Wow.
So they thought that I'd sort of grow out of it and get bored by 16 and then hopefully become a doctor or a lawyer or do something like that. And instead I left school, became an actress, and yes, and they're still hoping that I'll become a doctor or a lawyer, something like that.
And you never, did you study it ever? Did you just?
No, I mean, I meant to. I just...
Wait, you meant to before you dropped out of school?
Yeah,
and then...
no, well, it's just, I got offered, I did a TV version of Dr. Zhivago, and I was trying to do it at the same time, when I was 16, and I was trying to do it at the same time as studying, and I couldn't, and I meant to go back, and I said to my mum, is it okay if I drop out for a year? She said, yes, you're allowed to drop out for a year, but then you have to go back. And then I got Pirates of the Caribbean, and then it just sort of snowballed, and I never went back. And I'm still promising her that I will go back and finish my A-levels, which I think is like high school here or something like that, you know, but I haven't yet.
But did it work
She'll get
for you?
straight A's when she does, I'll tell you that. And she will.
Yes,
I don't know, that's not a laugh.
Straight A's, thank you very much. What was that?
It's all right, dear. It's one of those misogynists.
Yeah, misogynist in the back row. I'll try and be nice to him.
Yeah, just be charming.
Yeah.
Did it help with your dyslexia, this sort of, the work that you were you know?
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely did, because if you go into an audition a couple of times and they hand you a piece of paper and you can't read, the unbelievable, that. In fact, I mean, it was horrific. And the desperation never to have that happen was huge. So with my parents, and I have to say my parents were amazing with it, they worked absolutely tirelessly, and I worked all the time trying to get over it. But I still, I mean, I find sight reading really, really hard. And always when I was auditioning, I had to get the script a day or two in advance. And if there were auditions where they wouldn't do that and they'd just sort of give it to me on the day, I couldn't do it.
Right, and still now. And so it's that extra level of working.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's why I really enjoy doing a lot of research. But part of the research is actually, and work with the script, is actually because I literally can't sight read.
Interesting. So I wonder if it sort of filters in at a different rate or in a different way.
Probably. Apparently your brain works differently, but I don't know. I don't know how anybody else's brain works. It just seems normal.
And for you, you studied, right? You did study acting.
I did, yeah. Well, I studied acting for a year at Lambda, and I was at Manchester University for 3 years before that, doing a drama degree. And then before that, I was at school doing A-levels, you know, history of art, and English. I dropped history because I was doing too much acting and not enough history.
I was doing those A-levels too.
Were you?
Exactly the same ones. There they go.
There you go. Peas in a pod.
Just like that.
But yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. But it was a similar promise in a way. I mean, I wanted to do higher education mainly because I wanted my parents' wishes to be fulfilled, that I would have, you know, some kind of qualifications to fall back on. I mean, although it was a drama degree, it would still open the opportunity teaching or lecturing, yeah. And also, it was a very varied degree. It wasn't just about acting. The practical elements were everything from theatre and prisons of probation, this fantastic course, and also stuff. I mean, this was set up by Hugh Hunt at Granada Television in the, I don't forget, the mid-70s, I think. It was a really fantastic course in Manchester. And you know, there were writing video projects, directing courses, nothing vocationally just for acting. And then that was only 1/3 of the course, and then 2/3 was academic, anything from theatre design, post-World War II American theatre to, yeah. There's a time coming where we won't need any of you. And I studied it. No, I'm joking. God almighty, this is what putting someone on a plane for 12 hours does to them, and shoving them in front of a bright light and a TIFF Times thing. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, I did it, and I fulfilled my parents' wishes, but it didn't go anywhere academically. I mean, I had a great time, and I met some of my dearest friends, and had extraordinary experiences, which did actually broaden my horizons massively into all arenas.
You did this amazing teaching, right, in Tibet.
I did. That was before, yes, in West Bengal, in Darjeeling, actually, just on the borders of Tibet and Bhutan.
You were teaching English to...
I was teaching English to Tibetan Buddhist monks in a converted Nepali house. At the top was a monastery, and then their quarters, and what I converted into a schoolroom, and downstairs in this sort of dank, sweaty basement was my quarters, replete with spiders, and in the morning the magic of opening the windows and dry ice / clouds would literally roll in. I mean, it was extraordinary, and I'd be woken up with a puja ritual every morning at sort of 5, 6 in the morning.
Were you interested in Buddhism?
Yeah, I was.
Are you still?
Yeah,
yeah.
I am very much so. There's a lot of extraordinary wisdom and just common sense, really, to be held close and dear to you in the sort of weirdness of what I do and the world in general, I think. And as far as being focused or present and having a kind of control over being able to meditate towards a still point, to something that needs direct focus, like acting does, in all degrees, really, it's very helpful.
One thing I was thinking about, Keira, you were exposed to, like, Pirates of the Caribbean, this fame, this paparazzi chasing you at a very young age. Were you able to, I mean, and this has sort of happening with you now, do you sort of were you able to sort of advise him, or,
You've been asked this before, but actually she's done it without realising it. She would never have patronised me by saying that this is what you do, Benedict. She told me some of the horrors of what she went through.
That's because you saw it.
I saw it. I did see it literally firsthand.
Yes.
Like, what kind of things were you seeing?
Well, I'll let her tell you what she wants to tell you about that, but
no, I mean, it wasn't. I think what do I want to tell you about that? No. I completely.
It's her story.
Yes.
When this
for her to
started
censor,
happening, because you were quite young.
Yeah, about 18, 19. And having sort of 20 to 30 men who you don't know on 24-hour surveillance outside your house calling you a whore every time you leave the door to try and get a reaction from you is quite a difficult thing to deal with when you're 18 or 19 or 20 or 21 or 22, and it was a time when there was a lot of money for pictures of women crying, or of women in some state of undress, or of women, it was you'd walk down the street and you'd have men trying to get under your skirt to take pictures up your skirt, and all the time calling you a whore, and all the time spitting at you, or all the time trying to get a reaction from the guy who you were with, because it would make the price of that photograph quadruple, So when you've got a price on your head like that, it is a difficult thing to kind of deal with. I mean, for anybody, but for a young person. It's very different for me now, and I think there's been laws that are put in place now where that's not happening. But at that particular time, which was sort of about 2005 to maybe 2008 or 9, there was a lot of money to be made, and there were people who were perfectly fine with trying to make that money and create that picture. And certainly Ben was one of the friends who were around at that time who was going, oh my God,
Well, more than that, it's just disgusting behaviour. And the idea, this lack of nuanced understanding that because we're in the public eye, because our craft deserves, or needs, not deserves, sometimes it really doesn't deserve an audience, but when it, as in its nature, it needs something on the other side of it, to then presume that something on the other side of it needs to know everything about what we do in our private life. There's no separation between the personal.
It was less that, and it was a very particular kind of misogyny that was a
really,
very
really
extraordinary thing, being a young woman who'd been brought up in a very left-wing household that was taught that there was equality and that was taught about feminism, and to suddenly realise that kind of misogyny was mainstream and that's actually what our culture was quite a brutal realisation and quite a difficult thing to kind of get my head around at that time. I think I was incredibly lucky to have friends like Ben and other friends who were incredibly supportive and protective and all the rest of it. And I think that things are changing now, particularly now that there is discussions about feminism and how we view women and how we, and there should be, how we photograph them, those discussions are really important. But at that point, there wasn't that discussion, and nobody was talking about feminism. And in fact, that was something that we didn't need to worry about, and we didn't need to worry how we spoke about women or how we viewed women or anything like that. And it was definitely a confusing thing to be in the middle of.
Has it changed? Have you retreated to the point where, I mean, you have to go out and live your life, but
yeah,
you have probably had to retreat. Do they still yell these things at you?
No, no, and I don't know whether, I mean, I think that there's a certain point where, you get married, you get pregnant. I mean, they're like, hey, she's not going out getting drunk. So what, you know, I mean, I think that there is a level that you grow out of it because they can make a lot of money out of young girls. Because there is, you know, young women going through a natural kind of growth in their sexuality, growing up, wanting to be out, wanting to experience the world, you know, that's where they can make a lot of money and photograph them. Whereas you get a bit older and actually the pictures aren't worth it. You're going to the shop, you're buying your groceries, whatever. I mean, it's not, you're not going to make a lot of money out of that. So, I mean, yes, for me, it's completely different now. But I don't know, I don't look at the images that are out there, so I'm not quite sure what the state of it is.
That must have been brutal being that age. And did you have to sort of stop paying attention or develop a sort of a Teflon kind of?
Yeah. And it took a while. But yeah, I mean, yeah. And also get a great group of friends around you. And, you know, and I was really lucky that I did. Yes.
And your sort of, I mean, it might have, your congratulations on your personal life has changed recently.
Has it?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm not going to, you know, a lot has been said about your fans, their various names given to them. Do you feel, does it feel like it maybe is ebbing, or do you have that same sort of veracity, this pack following you?
I'm going to stick around for a bit, I'm afraid. I hate to tell you. I've always thought of my career as something I want to be doing, carrying on into my dotage until I can't remember the lines anymore, or just can't move. And, you know, I've been surrounded by people that have done that in my life of all ages. One of the great things about our profession is you work with people of every age, the very young and the very old. And that's inspiring to me. I'm not interested in being a man at the moment. I'm interested in longevity. I'm interested in striving to, you know, shed light on stories through the whole age of men and women. And yeah. So ebbing, who cares? I don't know. I don't keep a track of it. Somebody does somewhere. But I've been very, very fortunate with the opportunities I've had, and I've tried to capitalize on that as an actor. And that's what my job is. So I'm going to carry on doing that as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go to another clip from The Imitation. I love this one, The Imitation Sandwich clip. We're just swinging next. That's the name of the clip. And
all right, okay, yes, I think I know the one.
Oh, okay.
The boys, we're going to get some lunch. Alan?
Yes?
I said we're going to get some lunch. Alan?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I said we're off to get some lunch. This is starting to get a little bit repetitive.
What is?
I had asked if you wanted to come to lunch with us.
No, you didn't. You said you were going to get some lunch.
Have I offended you in some way?
Why would you think that?
Would you like to come to lunch with us?
What time's lunchtime?
Christ, Alan, it's a bleeding sandwich.
What is?
Lunch.
Oh, I don't like sandwiches.
Never mind.
I love him. I really do. I'm very fond of him.
Very literal, right?
Very little. I mean, you would argue semantics with Wittgenstein. You know, he was language was a hugely important trigger for him in a very real respect. Like I said earlier, this one word triggering this entire lateral thought process that has given us the modern computing age. So while that's a jokey riff on the idea of how awkward that could be in a social situation where people just want to sort of get to where they need to go instantly with language. You know, there are so many phrases and usages of words or phrases that when you really examine them as what they are, as logical constructs of thought, as stepping stones to understanding, a complete understanding, to communicate something far more unfathomable than words are often capable of reaching, then yeah, you can get lost in that. And he was obsessive with it and also isolated in it because of his struggle, I think, with language, because of how difficult it was for him to formulate language from his mind to his mouth, or to actually express it, even though it was there in his head. So he gave language a lot of thought. Very, very important for him.
One of the things that has emerged this year in the conversation around several Oscar films is, you know, people expecting or taking issue with certain films, saying they're not historically accurate. And this has happened, you know, obviously it happened with Selma, to a lesser extent with The Imitation Game. Do you feel like there is this expectation in these feature movies that is unrealistic of, you know, this is our history lesson. seems to be often an
I think
expectation.
it also undermines the intelligence of audiences. I think we're canny enough now as a populace going to see films about topics of reality to know, you know, that they stretch credibility, they conflate timelines, they conflate characters sometimes. People know they're not going to watch a solid truth from start to finish. And nobody, you know, based on true events. This is what it's I don't know any film I've seen of this ilk that doesn't say that.
No.
And a film is a film. It's a 2-hour piece of material that takes you on a narrative journey.
I think it's what is drama as opposed to what is documentary,
Well, exactly.
you know, and nobody's trying to pretend that this is a documentary. You're trying to get to the truth of that emotional core of something, which is different from absolutely every single fact being completely what it is.
Do we want truth from Picasso and Guernica? You know, just do you not understand the emotion or the intention of this distorted image of destruction through the abstract? Do you need a photograph of it to understand it? No, you look at that painting, you get a lot of what Guernica must have felt like, the destruction, the terror, the horror, the blood and the carnage. And I'm not comparing our film to Guernica, to Picasso, but you know, there's that rift between reality and art, which is endlessly fascinating for us. I mean, whether they're fictionalized stories, you know, magical realism or symbolism in any form other than a sort of pictorial reality. I think that's why we gravitate towards poems. You know, we deal. Our lives may be prose, but art is poetry, isn't it? It's about extrapolating things and creating a broader, deepening understanding that goes further than reportage.
Yet year after year, it seems like film after film, this is something that seems to be an evergreen, you know, expectation or something. What you're saying absolutely makes sense. This is art. Yet there's a tricky balance, right? Because there's this huge expectation, especially if you're playing real people, people who knew those people. And,
Birdman, Whiplash, Boyhood, they're 3 fictional films of outstanding brilliance and uniqueness. I think, you know, there's always room in every cultural moment for both. And I don't see that there's any more weight to one than the other. As long as...
Yeah, I think you have to be honest about, if you want the reality, then read the Andrew Hodges biography, and that is absolutely, you know, trying to tell the reality through his point of view.
By the way, he
which
wasn't
is always
there,
true.
exactly.
Yeah, and he wasn't there. It's still a point of view. So you know, who knows? But no, that is not what film drama is for. Yes, you're trying to tell as much of the truth as you possibly can, but actually in 2 hours, I mean, when I said before I'd come up with things that were true about Joan Clarke and say, yeah, but what about this? I mean, particularly the equal pay thing. And you think, okay, in 2 hours about the biopic of Alan Turing, how do you fit the equal pay story for Joan Clarke in there? And it is 10 more pages, and that is 10 more minutes in the film, or 15 more minutes, and actually you need to hand it in, and it's got to be whatever this is, 1 hour and 45 or 2 hours, and suddenly that doesn't, you know, I mean, it's...
There's a tear there, isn't there? Because you do feel protective as an actor of the legacy of the person you're playing.
And you do make the argument for the truth as well, but you also understand the other side.
Yeah.
Well, even in documentaries, I was speaking to James Marsh, who directed The Theory of Everything, and he directed a documentary called Project Nim, which is a heartbreaking story about this chimp who's, anyway. But people had issue with the documentary. They said, no, that's not how it was. So unless you're...
view.
Yeah, it's this, I don't know, it's an evergreen topic.
The camera is a frame, isn't it? It's a chosen image.
Yeah, what's
you know, there's a lot on the
frame?
outside of it, and sometimes that's as equally interesting as what's going on in the middle, and that's the play. You know, we only have our 2 eyes, we only have 1 frame.
We're going to open up to questions, and so microphones are going to come down, and wait till it's in front of you before you ask. So we'll start with this lady in the front, and then this lady behind her. Make sure you speak into the microphone. Thank you.
My question is slightly odd, but I don't know if you're aware, but today would be the birthday of Khan in Star Trek, and I wanted to ask you if you could throw a message to one of your characters, well, either him or any other character. What would you choose to tell to any of your characters? Preferably Khan, because it's my favorite, but or any of them. Sorry, it's such a weird question.
You're only frozen.
Great. Okay, so let's have right here, right behind you, the lady with the lovely blue feathered earrings. If we could pass along the microphone to her.
Hi. Is there something from the script that you took in and learned and that you apply to your own life?
I mean, I'd go back to what I said before, which was being nice as opposed, you know, trying to break that glass ceiling by sort of, you know, as opposed to smashing it. I'd say that was quite sensible.
Yeah, and I think opening yourself to the consensus of a group and not being frightened of being judged for being different, but actually being open to that being something to celebrate. Definitely, that's something I took away from it.
Right. Gentleman there.
Out of all the characters that you have portrayed, which one do you think you personally resemble and why?
To both of us, or yeah,
both of us, yeah.
Shakan.
Yes.
You haven't seen that?
No, I'm imagining.
You're imagining, okay. Yeah.
You as a tiger.
A wounded tiger.
There you go.
Angry, wounded tiger.
Yep.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. No, only on very bad mornings.
I suddenly can't remember any character I've played.
But I mean, this is a bit like, what's your favourite? Sorry, it's a good question. It's just I'm rubbish at answering these kind of questions because you have to assimilate or empathise. Obviously, this is such page one acting guff, but you know, it's true. You have to bridge between yourself and what you're portraying, however different or transformative that character may be from your existence and reality. So there's always part of you that hooks in at some degree. However devastatingly awful or nasty they might be, you have to understand what their weakness is that has brought them to that. You have to treat them with some respect. And so I find, yeah, it's a really hard question to answer.
And he is going to go for Shere Khan.
Shere Khan.
Yeah. What about you, Keira?
Oh. Actually, weirdly, Begin Again and Laggies, I think, which were two films I had come out last year, I think probably somewhere in the amalgamation of both of those is something quite close to me.
Which is interesting because you often play historical, and these were both modern ladies.
I mean, I think that's why I enjoy doing historical characters, because I like it not to be like me, and I like it to kind of, you know, because I mean, that's what I love doing. I love sort of trying to climb into somebody else's shoes and really see the world through a different perspective. And I love it when my imagination can create a whole new world, which is what I feel like it does with historical pieces. And I think probably it would be the same if I did a sci-fi. You know, I love that kind of creation of the whole world. There's a freedom in that. You know, I feel quite constricted by doing pieces that are set today, because we know what our world is today, you know, and you know the rules, and you can kind of break them in historical pieces, and I sort of enjoy that.
Oh, cool. That lady right there.
Yes, can you talk about what each of your favorite scenes is from the movie, and why?
Again, I'm not really very good at favourites.
Mine was the scene at the end when Joan goes to see Alan, when she sees Alan, and because it was so moving, and it was what we all wanted to say to him, and I don't know that she did say that. I don't know that she said, you know, thank God, or anyone said thank God you weren't normal, and it was what you want. Like I think the message of the film, in a way, is that, and it was a really tricky one to actually do, because of where we were filming and the way that it was all constructed and everything, but it was really amazing to sort of to work on it.
And they stayed friends, didn't they, throughout their lives?
Until he died, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. They were very close. Very, very close.
Well, here and then there. Sorry.
To set you guys up for like your emotional state for your characters, have you ever listened to like a certain musical artist to prepare yourself for that certain tone of a scene?
Yeah, music really helpful. One of the most helpful things to do to get you into a specific sort of abstract thought space. It's
Elgar cello concertos. It's pretty good. Try it.
Yeah. Pretty much anything by Sigur Rós.
Yeah.
Is pretty.
Rachmaninoff can kind of do it as well.
Yeah.
You know.
This is also true. If you've got the time for Rachmaninoff.
If you've got but you normally do on a film set.
That's true.
So, yeah.
That's true. In the digital age, not so much. But yeah, the music is it's incredibly important.
Hi, thank you so much for your amazing film. I am a musician as well, and I love computers. I started programming when I was 10.
Wow.
But I have a question I want to answer to, and I can't really find anything on the internet, and I wonder, in your research, do you think that Steve Jobs made the Apple icon based on
No.
Alan Turing? No?
And I know that for a fact because Stephen Fry interviewed him and asked him that very question, and he said, "I wish I had." I mean, it's a rainbow-coloured apple with a bite taken out of it, and you know, I know you guys know that was the sort of that's become the iconic image of Turing's death. What we now know as well from there was an extraordinary exhibition at the Science Museum in London on his centenary, and there was the pathology report, the post-mortem, and it was a solution of cyanide that he'd swallowed in liquid form. It wasn't an accident, and he probably had bit the apple to take away the taste of it and put it on the bedstand. Wow. And if anything, maybe to just divert attention or shame away from his mother, that it looked like an accident, that it looked like Alan had a tragic, clumsy accident rather than had committed suicide because of being destroyed by this drug, by this estrogen injection, which at that stage was implanted into his leg, like I said, and was still dosing him months after the 2-year sentence was up. And one of the stories that, again, just blew me away about him was that one of his colleagues who was still alive, who I was lucky enough to speak to, who knew him in his time at Manchester, I was asking him, saying, look, what change did you notice, a physical or emotional change? And he said, no, not really. Alan was very good at keeping all that subdued, but even the physical change, I didn't notice much. He still ran, but I didn't notice whether it was faster or slower. But there was one moment where he said to me, I got this injection weekly, and then the doctor said, it's a bit embarrassing for both of us, isn't it, old chap? Why don't I give you this slow-release device? And I said, well, will it stop after 2 years? And he said, yes, it will stop after 2 years. And it's many months after the 2-year sentence should have stopped, and it's still releasing. That's not really cricket, is it? Said Alan Turing to his colleague. And then, you know, a few weeks later, in a dark night of the soul, he went into his kitchen and took out a carving knife and gouged that out of his leg. I mean, he was definitely a man in a state of suicidal depression. He'd been robbed of his dignity, of his sexuality, of his identity, of his faculty, his mind, his ability to be a computer programmer, to work in artificial intelligence, to function. And that was the only way out at that point.
Thanks. The woman behind her, please.
Hi, thank you for bringing these amazing characters to life. So my 13-year-old brother now knows who Alan Turing is, so it's pretty awesome.
That's great.
Good.
I wanted to know, Benedict, if you got to keep any memento from the set, anything that meant something to you personally or that tied into Alan. And for Keira, how did it feel to play such an amazing woman?
No, I didn't set steel. I bought a beautiful print of him, though, which is in my house, which a wonderful artist did. But I didn't take anything from the set. No, might have one of the shirts that was made for him, maybe. But no artifact, and you know, neither would I want to really. I mean, it would be sort of, yeah, cultural theft in a way. Not because our film is the cultural thing, but just of taking something away from him and his narrative.
I wish I was as articulate as you.
You are, as you've proven time and time again tonight.
Right. I mean, yeah, it was amazing.
You've got the question.
I've forgotten the question.
The question was, you know, how was it playing such an amazing woman?
You know, I think particularly at a time when gender inequality is still such an issue, it is always so wonderful to get the opportunity to learn about extraordinary women, historically and today. So yeah, I thought it was a great privilege to be able to do that and to play her and to learn about her. Definitely.
Hi, I think you've talked about a lot about your research on the background of the characters. I was wondering, during your research, what details do you think that affect your acting the most?
Well, some of the sort of stripped-back personal stories that I've already elucidated, and it's the sort of snapshots, really. You know, you try and understand as much of the science as possible, which for a layperson as stupid as me is impossible. But you need to try and give some kind of, well, you just need to play certain moments and scenes when you're going, what am I doing with this wire and this thing? You have to understand, at least from the art department, what they're replicating. And there were things like drawing schematics, which was incredibly helpful. The art department made these plans based on the original plans for the bomb, as it was called, Christopher in our version. And just drawing that, just simply crafting that and having a vague understanding of what that was, the shape of a dynamo or a cog or a setting on a particular reel with inside this incredible machine of calculus, just gave me some ownership in those fragments of thought and processing and intellectual endeavor, which are really important because, you know, this man was extraordinary. And yet it's always the human things, you know, it's discovering that the stammer, discovering how he was bullied at Sherborne, discovering how colleagues loved him and found him infuriating and in equal measure, discovering how humorous he was, how he pedalled on his bicycle, how he had oil on his legs and ink on his hands, tie skew whiff, often tucked his, you know, shirt into the wrong part of his trousers, or just somebody who was human, really. It's the human detail. It's the stuff that's all of us that really kind of gets the hooks in for an actor, for me anyway, you know, the stuff you can relate to. I answered your question as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
I need the bathroom.
We're almost, yes.
Sorry, I think it's... Yeah.
Yes, we're almost wrapping up.
I'm calling it live on the internet. I'm out. Time out. Time to talk to us. Okay, all right, maybe one more.
Okay.
You both speak so eloquently and passionately, yes, even you, Keira, about the movie. And it's something akin to how I see directors talk about their movies. So I was wondering if either of you ever wanted to maybe dabble in directing at some point.
Yep,
yes.
definitely.
There you go.
That's a good answer.
Do you?
I don't know.
You'd be brilliant at it.
Do you?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
I do. I do, really do.
Oh, back there.
I've got it right now, yeah, I really do. Yeah. Sorry, just had a private chat about
how much he needs the toilet. It's really good.
Thanks, Keira.
No probs.
I keep getting ticked off for saying that in public, but, you know, I've drunk a bottle of water. What can I say? Go on.
For both of you, I was just wondering what main messages you'd like to send to your fans through your portrayals of both these roles.
That's a really good question. Well, actually, not just, well, whatever fan means. Anyone who likes the work and watches what either of us do, or have just come to this film cold, I think the only thing I'd really want to impart is that it is the central message of the film, which is it's absolutely fine to be different. Don't feel that you have to apologize for it. Don't feel that you have to endure stereotyping or any kind of racism, sexism, any kind of form of, objectifying and intolerance, really. That this is a film to encourage people to be who they are. It's an outsider's hero's film.
And we have to remain vigilant because as much as you say this is a historic piece, there is still huge inequality, there is still huge hatred against gay people, again, and we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
It still speaks now, to people now. It's why it's such a potent thing, whether it's, religious persecution, sexual, racial, this exists, and it's something we have to...
You lose great minds because of it, and
Yeah.
we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I think that's it, really.
Exactly that. I'm sorry, I'm really going to have to go.
Yeah, this will be...
No, this is it.
All right, okay. This is the last question.
Bye.
Oh, he's
No,
going.
you can ask
Okay,
a question, but
okay.
No.
He's, okay.
I have to go, sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Where's
I think
the
you have
microphone?
everything.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you.
I guess we're going. Thank you, everybody.